All right, welcome to the explainer. So, get this. What if you could actually build your leadership style, kind of like a piece of software? Well, today, we're getting a look inside the playbook of a real world senior manager at Google. This isn't just some abstract theory, it's a living, breathing operating system for leading teams that are under a ton of pressure, and we are going to unpack its code. So, let's just start with that big framing question. What if leadership isn't something you're just born with? What if it's not a personality trait, but a system, something you can actually design, install, and then, continuously upgrade over time? That is the core idea we're diving into today, the leadership operating system. So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll talk about the big idea, the premise of the Leadership OS. Then, we're going to dig into its core code, the kernel. From there, we'll look at the day-to-day, command line, the applications it runs for key tasks, and finally, how it handles the inevitable bugs with system maintenance. All right, so let's dive in. Where did this whole system even come from? Well, it was developed and used by a senior manager at Google, leading a team of about 35 people. And this team has a huge job. They're in charge of things like personalization, growth, and store engagement. We're talking really high-stakes work, where having a clear leadership framework is absolutely everything. Every great operating system has to have a stable core, right? Its kernel, the foundational code that everything else is built on. Well, for a leader, this is your core philosophy. These are the non-negotiable beliefs that are going to power every single decision you make. For this manager, the kernel is built on these 4 pillars. See, it all starts with having a crystal clear vision. When that's clear, you can actually foster a culture of trust and accountability. That trust then gets reinforced because you're making decisions based on data, not just gut feelings. And the whole thing is held together by a serious commitment to technical excellence. This is the bedrock. Okay, so if that philosophy is the kernel, the deep down code, how does it actually do anything? Well, that's where the command line comes in. These are the daily operating principles, the actual commands the manager runs every single day to bring that philosophy to life. And boom, here are those commands. You can see exactly how they connect back to the philosophy. Empower through ownership, well, that directly builds that culture of trust we just talked about. Prioritize measurable outcomes, that's just the daily practice of being data-driven. These aren't just posters on a wall, they're the manager's go-to toolkit. Now, this right here, this is huge. It's really the core principle of the entire system. Lead with context, not control. It's a massive shift away from micromanagement. The idea is, instead of telling smart people exactly what to do, you give them so much context on the why that they can make incredible decisions all on their own. It's about empowerment, not oversight. Okay, so we've got the core philosophy and the daily commands. Now let's see how this thing actually runs the essential apps of management. The core jobs every leader has to do, like one-on-ones, hiring people, and developing the team. And wow, just look at the difference this OS makes for something as basic as a one-on-one meeting. The old way, the traditional way, is that it's a status report for the manager. But with this OS, the meeting is owned by the employee. It's their agenda. The leader's job is simply to listen, to help unblock them, and to focus on their growth. The philosophy is so clear. People first, projects second. Yeah, and team development, it's not some once-a-year thing in this system. It is baked right in. It all starts with actually knowing what people's career aspirations are. Then, the manager's job becomes a kind of matchmaker, connecting those goals to real, meaningful work, to stretch assignments, and then giving them the feedback and the visibility they need to totally knock it out of the park. It's the same deal with hiring. The hiring app is totally programmed for the long game. It's not about just filling a seat by checking boxes on a resume. It's about hiring for someone's strengths and their potential. What could this person become on our team? And this is so critical. It's about guarding against that "we need someone now" pressure, because we all know that's the fastest way to make a bad hire. And that long-term thinking, it even shows up in how the team itself is structured. For this manager, an org chart isn't some static thing you make once a year. No, it's a dynamic tool. The whole point of the structure is to deliver business goals with the least amount of friction possible. That means absolute clarity of ownership, minimizing those messy handoffs, and even designing the roles so that growth is just built right in. But let's be real, no system is perfect, right? Bugs happen, errors pop up. So what happens when things go sideways? This last part is all about system maintenance, how this framework handles the tough stuff and actually uses feedback to get stronger. So when stuff inevitably goes wrong, a project fails, there's a conflict, there's a process. It's not about freaking out. The first step is to stay calm and actually understand the full situation. You clarify what's really at stake for the business, for morale, for trust. The real art here is balancing that genuine empathy for the person with accountability for the outcome. And you do it all in a way that preserves trust. Okay, this next idea, this might be one of the most powerful parts of the entire system. Treat feedback as data, not judgment. Think about that. When someone gives you tough feedback, our first human reaction is to get defensive. But if you can reframe it in your head, this isn't a judgment on my character, it's just data about my impact. It is a complete game changer. It lets you step back and use it to get better. And check this out. Here is the actual step-by-step algorithm for doing just that. It's a repeatable process for turning that raw feedback into actual improvement. You listen, you separate their intent from your impact, you ask questions, you own your part. But that last step, step 6, that's what builds massive trust. You actually go back to the person who gave you the feedback and you close the loop by showing them what you did with it. So, when you see it all laid out like this, you realize that great leadership isn't magic. It's not some mysterious quality. It can be designed. It can be built. It can be debugged and refined, just like an operating system. So, looking at this whole blueprint, from the core philosophy all the way to the debugging process, the only real question left is, what's the first piece of code you're going to install in your own system?